The air on Zeus didn't just smell of rust, it tasted of a dying world's final desperate breath. It is the kind of place where hope goes to suffocate, leaving only the bitter flaking decay of neglect. Amidst the cacophony of a prison riot, shouted commands, the wet thud of bodies, and the sizzle of acidic drizzle on hot metal, two figures sprinted through the steam. They were enemies, shackled by a humming blue energy cuff that glowed like a curse in the twilight. Kai, a disgraced human pilot with eyes like chips of flint, and Lyra, a Zorn warrior of lethal grace, were bound together by mutual hatred and a singular need to escape. They scrambled through a blast hole onto a narrow ledge, the wind howling like a wounded beast. But the path was a traitor. Lyra slipped on the wet stone, her warrior's balance failing for a heartbeat, and gravity did the rest. The chain pulled taut, dragging them into the abyss. They struck a stone outcropping 100 feet down with bone-jarring force. Lyra rose, bruised but functional. Kai, however, was broken. His leg was a grotesque ruin, white bone-piercing, tattered fabric, blood pooling on the gray stone. Lyra, cold and logical, raised a sharpened stone to end his suffering. In her world, the broken were liabilities to be discarded. But Kai didn't beg. With a guttural roar that echoed off the chasm walls, he grabbed his shattered shin. Snap. The sound was wet and grinding, louder than the storm above. Lyra watched in horrified fascination as the human didn't die. He evolved. His body convulsed, knitting bone and muscle with violent speed. "Pain is just information," he gasped, sweat pouring down his face as he stood. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? That agony isn't a stop sign, but a map to something greater. The hunt forced them into the nightmare terrain of Zeus. They waded through the mire of whispers, where neurotoxic leeches latched onto Kai's skin. The poison should have stopped his heart. Instead, his blood boiled and synthesized an antitoxin within the hour. Later, in the glass canyons, a crystalline crag-stalker dislocated his shoulder. He slammed the joint back against a rock wall, the trauma triggering muscle density that allowed him to shatter the beast's obsidian hide with a single punch. Lyra began to realize that human strength wasn't about the absence of weakness, but the dynamic relationship with it. Seeking shelter in the rusted husk of a crashed ship, the Nightfire, they unearthed a ghost. A holographic log from Lyra's brother, Thex, flickered to life in the gloom. He hadn't been lost in battle. He had been murdered by Project Nightshade, an Alliance bioweapon. The revelation shattered their worldviews. Their governments were two sides of the same corrupt coin. In the silence of that dead ship, the chain between them stopped feeling like a shackle and started feeling like a lifeline. Two soldiers who chose honor over orders. They eventually found refuge with the Marked, Zorn outcasts living in the deep caves, led by the scarred giant, Krax. These were the warriors who refused to die when broken, living paradoxes to the Zorn perfection. "We are the inconvenient truth," Krax told them. "It reminds us that society often discards what it cannot control, yet there is immense power in the discarded." Then, Commander Vorlag found them. He cornered them in the prismatic light of the canyons. Vorlag, Lyra's mentor, was the avatar of Zorn perfection. He dismantled Lyra with surgical strikes and cruel words, driving her to her knees, proving that she was flawed. But Kai saw the pattern. He screamed the impossible command, "Lyra, break my ribs!" She hesitated, then chose trust over tradition. She kicked him, shattering his sternum. The agony triggered a systemic override. Kai moved not like a man, but like a force of entropy. He overwhelmed Vorlag's calculated perfection with chaotic, adaptive violence. He didn't kill the commander. Instead, he snapped Vorlag's arm with a precise, sickening crunch. "Upgrade!" Kai growled, leaving the warrior alive to learn the lesson of the broken. Years later, the hegemony was a memory. On the bridge of a captured dreadnought, Kai and Lyra stood as legends, their old energy cuff reforged into matching bracelets. Even Vorlag was there, his arm healed and scarred, a loyal ally who had finally learned that strength comes from recovery. A child played at their feet, young Thex, a hybrid with gray eyes and blue skin. He built a tower of blocks, laughed when it fell, and immediately began rebuilding it stronger. Kai watched him, his hand finding Lyra's. "We fall, we break, we rise," he said. "In the end, perhaps that is the only story that matters. Not how we avoid the fall, but how we rebuild the ruins."